In half an hour here on Radio 4, Irma Kurt, Cosmopolitan magazine's agony aunt for over 40 years, begins a series talking each day to a different agony aunt from around the world. In World Agony, we hear from aunts in India, Australia, Egypt, South Africa, and this morning at 9:30, America. Before that, though, the first of three programmes in which composers turn sight into sound and conjure music from the horizon. Tim Marlowe presents Playing the Skyline.
Courtney Pine sketching with his bass clarinet the rises and falls of the London skyline. His first reaction to the view from the Millennium Bridge, looking north to St Paul's, then sweeping east and then down to the Shard. And this is composer Anna Meredith's response to the same view. Welcome to Playing the Skyline. Today, next Monday and the one after that, I'll be following 6 prominent musicians, each working in a different idiom, as they consider the line between the land and the sky, trace it onto a musical stave, and create from this a new piece of music in which they play the skyline. You'll find images of the musicians, skylines and extracts of the music by visiting the Radio 4 website. And you might like to have a go at playing your own skyline too. Next week, the skyline will be Welsh, the week after Scottish. But we begin in London with the germ of the idea. It came not from hearing music, nor looking at the horizon, but from a map, an old nautical chart. I went to see Robert Blythe, who's Senior Curator of Maritime History at the National Maritime Museum.
What we're looking at here is a page from the Mariner's Mirror, essentially a sea atlas from 1588, so dating back to the time of the Spanish Armada.
When I first look at it, it looks like a conventional map because we're seeing from above the coastline of, around the Thames estuary. We're seeing from above the coastline of, around the Thames estuary, I think.
Yeah, you can see the Goodwin Sands, you can see Tilbury and Gravesend and Harwich. But at the top of the spread, we've got what is a coastal profile. In other words, what a mariner would see looking at the coast from his vessel.
I like the intricacy with which the undulated coastal profile is mapped, but when you look at this, which is, I think this is a coastal profile of somewhere in Nova Scotia, Sable Island, we have beautifully rendered, I'd say, watercolour profile, but underneath something much more akin to a kind of musical notation where long stretches of this sand dune ridden coastline are sort of charted, up and down, but microscopic detail almost.
For the mariner, all they're interested in for identification purposes is that tiny thin strip between sea and sky. You might look ashore only by moonlight, or the sun may be behind the skyline, so in which case you're looking in at silhouette. And of course that's where the pared down one becomes very important indeed.
I find it quite sad in a way, kind of nostalgic almost, that these beautifully produced coastal profiles now don't have, their function is historical document. But I like the idea that we can try and use them in a contemporary manner as the basis for composers making music. Is that an idea that resonates with you, or do you think we're completely off the scale?
It sounds fairly bonkers to me, and I have no idea what naval officers of the time would have thought of the idea of converting their profiles, something of importance for navigation, into music. But then, of course, some of them were bonkers too, so the idea might have some appeal.
I'm in the middle of Millennium Bridge in London, St Paul's to my left, Tate Modern to my right. I'm joined by the composer Anna Meredith and the jazzman and legend Courtney Pine. And both of you, I'm just going to show you this, which is a coastal profile. And this was a nautical aid for sailors, and you can see this beautifully deft watercolour of the ocean and the sky, but effectively this undulating coastline of cliffs and beaches that then can get transformed in more notated form in black and white into something that
we think looks a little like musical notation. And that's where the idea came from. Does this say music to you in any way?
Hi Tim, it definitely does. The shapes, the height, the structure.
Yeah.
You know, it's on a line, and we read music from a score, which is several lines, and sometimes it is one line if you play percussion. But this is definitely a musical, can be a starting point for music. I'm hearing the notes.
So,
We've got consensus, Anna, have we?
yeah, for me, I mean, every piece I do, I actually draw something very similar to this as a starting point. So this feels quite familiar in a way. I like to have a big structural shape with lots of contour, and that for me is how I begin every piece. So I'm bring it on. This is good for me. It makes a
Right,
lot of
well, I'm
sense.
going to bring it on, because all I'm going to get you to do now is turn your heads
Right.
and look at this expansive view. We could say from St Paul's right the way around to Tate Modern, with the Shard to our right and the walkie-talkie building somewhere centre left, with Tower Bridge in the distance. And how does that now grab you? Let's take the act of transformation again. How does this now start to feel musically? Is it full of possibilities?
For me as a composer, just looking at the horizon here, it's a moving environment. There's so many things happening around here. The buildings and the shapes, the height. It's just a wonderful expanse to compose from, especially as a Londoner.
But is this just a trigger? In other words, once you've got your way in,
Yeah.
the music in some ways has a journey, a rhythm, a skyline of its own.
Oh no, I'll definitely stick to this skyline. I'm going to stick to this. This is my home,
So it might be a labour of love that we're asking you to undertake.
without a shadow of doubt. And yes, I did put my hand up straight away for this.
It's interesting, the cranes and the high-rise buildings, they're a kind of rhythm that punctuates the landscape.
Construction has always been a big part of this view. When you think of the Great Fire and what happened after that, when you think of the story of immigration and how they've contributed to this that we see on. My dad's a carpenter, and he helped contribute to some of these buildings that you see here. When you look at rhythm, melody, harmony, of course you've got to make the right decisions, or decisions that actually will do something which is functional, and that to me is the difficult.
Anna, what about you? Less emotional.
I really like the idea that maybe with my piece you might be able to tell, oh yeah, that is Millennium Bridge, that is St Paul's, that is Tower Bridge, and you can actually hear the shape of the object in the piece. But I can tell my controlling sense is wanting to say, yes, but which bit? Because if I turn my head slightly, I can see a completely different musical structure. Then if I turn again, then, suddenly we move into the city and there's these big skyscrapers, and then we move, into the river, and obviously that's a very different set of graphic shapes. So I'm wanting, I think, to really pin it down.
That's really interesting. So both of you are from the same perspective, literal perspective, but both of you have rather different musical perspectives as to what you might do with this. So which section, Anna, are you going to take then, looking at it now? Will you go for something in the distance, or will you go as frontally as you can?
After having a little look and a sketch of a few options, I think I'm liking the idea of doing Blackfriars Bridge, which has this beautiful gentle curve over the whole shape of the river. It's got 4 big columns that break up the bridge, and then it's got these lovely kind of curves in between the columns which have vertical slats in them. There's a real rhythm to that bridge.
That's very focused in, actually. It's interesting because your skyline is the bridge straight ahead of
I
us.
think I feel good about that. I started before drawing something with lots of the cranes and stuff, and it was getting too unfocused, and so yeah, I feel I can do something good with that.
Great. Well, off you go. Thank you very much. I'm Tim Marlowe, and you're listening to Playing the Skyline, in which I'm following the jazz musician Courtney Pine and the composer Anna Meredith as they create new pieces of music out of the line between the buildings and the sky, seen from the Millennium Bridge spanning the River Thames. A few weeks have now passed since we stood on the bridge looking at the skyline, Courtney sketching with his bass clarinet and Anna with pencil and paper. Time then to find out how the musicians are getting along with their commissions.
I played a bit on the bridge, and I knew by playing on the bridge that the instrumentation, bass clarinet that I played, was the right one. So I've taken that idea back home, and I've come up with this idea of a bass clarinet choir. The funny thing for me now is that I have to try and play what I've composed, and I had no consideration for my chops, my playing chops. But this is, this is the crosses we have to bear as composers. We have to play it as well. I've started with a motif that kind of is St. Paul's Cathedral, an ascending line. It's like when you look at St. Paul's Cathedral, you get the height, the structure. So it's a very simple fourth arpeggio scale. But as you look from the left to the right, you notice the structure and the construction. We discussed the cranes, the shapes of each building, all the way across to London Bridge. What I've tried to piece together in my composition is a sense of polyrhythmic, polytonality, lots of tones working with and against each other. So there, sometimes you hear a pattern in 3/4 time on top of a 4/4 rhythm. When you do that, you get a new rhythm appearing. So there's a lot of rhythms that are played on top of each other. Now, when I transcribe that to the written score, it actually does look like the skyline. In a strange way. You can actually impose it on top of the skyline. And also that the aspect of using different dimensions was important to me. It wasn't just looking at the obvious things, the blue sky and the construction. It was looking at what was below. You know, the history of the environment, the fact that the people had wisdom to put this structure together. There's a structure called the Gherkin, which just stands out. You know, there's still unusual things. And if you look along the skyline, you'd be like, well, why is that there? It was a mixture of all these things that I was trying to piece together and more. I felt the need to represent London and from the corner of the world that I come from in terms of my cultural experiences. So this comes across, I hope, with a sense of Africanology, a sense of building on rhythms on top of each other, the polytone aspect of it. It's hard to say because I haven't quite finished it yet.
Anna, when we were on the bridge, Courtney was looking more at the expansive skyline, but you decided you want to focus in on a section and actually then decided on Blackfriars Bridge. Have you stuck with that?
Yeah, the more I look at the sort of shape and the elements of that bridge, the more I'm liking it as a kind of starting point.
So the inspiration in situ is now becoming the distilled essence of what you're doing.
Well, I'm taking it quite structurally. What I'm seeing at the moment is there's a very gentle arch shape on the top half of the bridge, and then underneath it there's these 4 big pillars which themselves have lower arches which come up to meet them. So I'm seeing maybe a sort of glissandoing, like a sort of note-bending texture which will move through chord sequences from one chord to the other, then a kind of structural event which would be the pillars. But how dramatic that structural event will be, I'm sort of working on at the moment.
Without making this competitive, because it isn't, but Courtney's making a piece for a choir of bass clarinets. He's decided on 4 of them. What about your instrumentation?
I'm thinking I work a lot with electronics as well as with orchestral and acoustic instruments. So I like the idea of a kind of electronic texture and a single solo instrument. And at the moment I'm thinking cello and possibly a very special kind of way of playing the cello with this curved bow, which means you can play all 4 cello strings at once as opposed to the sort of 1 or 2 you'd normally play with a straight bow. And I thought that had a lovely kind of tie-in with the curves of the bridge.
I mean, this maybe says more about me than it does about you, but I do find myself wandering around the place now and seeing skylines and thinking, ooh, I wonder how that would sound. Has the idea of taking a commission on like this in any way changed the way you engage with the world? I'm not asking for a grand statement, but I just wonder whether there's any subtle way in which you now view the world differently.
In a way, it makes me feel smugly validated. I feel like I've always liked contour and I've always done these drawings from my own composing. It's the first step I'll do. It's a drawing very similar to the drawing I've done for this piece, which really informs everything about the pacing of the music.
So this isn't a crazy idea, it's just us coming closer to how you work or think.
This is everyone coming into my master plan.
And if you're feeling inspired by the idea of landscape into music, we'd be interested to hear your playing the skyline compositions. It's quite simple, really. Find a skyline that interests you and then play it. Record it, you can even do that on a mobile phone, and then send your compositions, no longer than 3 minutes please, with a picture of the skyline being played, to Playing Your Skyline, all one word, at bbc.co.uk. That's Playing Your Skyline at bbc.co.uk. And we'll put the best ones up on the website, where you can also see pictures of the landscapes or skylines that have inspired our musicians, and hear some of the music from this programme. Right. Judgment Day now. Anna Meredith and Courtney Pine are here with me in the studio. Neither have heard the other's piece. I've not heard your pieces. So let's toss a coin first to see who goes. Anna, you can call.
Sure, Tails.
Tails it is. So, would you like your piece to go first or second?
You know what, having what we were talking about in the bridge and bearing all that stuff in mind, I think I'd rather go second. I knew I was going to say that, right? Yeah.
Splendid. So, Courtney, as the loser, you're going to go first. Would you like to introduce the piece?
It's entitled Skyline, and it's music for 4 bass clarinets, and it's about the London skyline that we saw.
Interesting, joyful and chaotic. We all had smiles on our faces to begin with. Then it became more melancholic, but always that playful element. Anna, what's your response?
The humour is really, really lovely, and I wasn't really expecting it. I think maybe from our meeting, I think I was expecting something sort of overwhelming and chaotic, and actually it's just joyful. It's really joyful. I couldn't stop smiling.
Interesting, joyful and chaotic, because London is this amazingly layered, amorphous city, and that skyline isn't so ordered to me, but you found order within it.
Well, I was discussing with myself about the buildings, the constructions of the skyline as you look from left to right, and how you'd have cranes, for example. I tried to just reflect that, and I'm hoping it reflected how happy I was on that day. It was a nice sunny day. But it's for me a sense of identifying structures on the skyline musically, to have a sense of development and rhythm. I started off with a scale of which ascends in fourths, and I thought that's St. Paul's, the dome, well constructed. So I tried to have some order. What's happened was the composition became, instead of a 3-minute thing, it became a 4-minute and 30 thing. So I've had to edit it down so that instead of becoming crotchets, became quavers. Instead of it became faster.
I like the idea of the accelerated pace, though, the way you experience that vision, that skyline, but it also reflects the way we often are in cities, that life seems faster and faster.
So when you did stuff like change the key in the middle, was that your left to right, or was that, once you'd started to think about getting more of a sense of, about being about your personal experience, does it eventually mean that you can't be too literal?
It means that you're free to go left or right, or back and forward, or up and down. Or across laterally.
So that's a no then.
No, not really. I wanted to have a piece. First of all, I had 3 elements.
in the composition, there are three parts. So the beginning starts with a kind of constructed thing, which is a human element. Then there's a kind of a pastoral, kind of quieter section, which is kind of like the rippling water. Then the end section, and ascending to, we're trying to get to this point. So you're looking up eventually. So I didn't really have one or two or three or four objectives. It was many objectives.
Composite. Let's hold that for the moment, and let's go into what I'm expecting to be a tauter physical piece. In other words, the bridge. Anna, you said that was where you focused in on, and that's when we talked, when you were in the middle of doing this, that's where it focused. Is that how the pieces ended up?
Yeah, for me, I needed to keep going smaller, and a bridge is still pretty massive, but I've had to really focus in to give myself a framework. So, I've taken the shape, the quite literal shape of Blackfriars Bridge, and worked with my friend, the cellist Ollie Coates, to do a piece for cello and electronics called Blackfriars.
What's your response, Courtney?
I immediately went to my iPad where we took some pictures when we did the interview on the bridge, and it does reflect this picture that I have in front of me.
Which is on our website now, so the listeners can actually go to the website and look at it.
Well, it does look like a piece of music there.
I think the expanse of it felt important to me, and it had its own world, and it stayed consistent within that. The tapping you hear, I just felt within these big arch shapes there needed to be some kind of pulse.
So waxing and waning, or swelling and dipping.
Yeah, it's the big arches of the bridge, and it's played with this curved bow, which means you can play you can play all the strings of the cello at once rather than just one. So hopefully you heard there was 4 chord sequences that happened 4 times, and each time there's a new extra layer of the cello. So it's you have these arches, there's 4 arches in the bridge, and you hear there's a new layer to each of the arches.
I was thinking about that when you explained a couple of weeks ago that you were going to do this, because the way that we encounter views, we may start left to right, but we can actually take quite a lot of the view in simultaneously. And music often starts and then one note is replaced by the next. And of course, there is sometimes an overlap, but the idea of a curved bow means that it's an accretion, isn't it? It's a build-up of note or sound that's very strong. It's more than just the trace of what we've just heard. That note is still there. It's present. It's like building up a chord on a piano, in other words.
Exactly. You're able to get a depth that you can't normally get. And exactly what you said about the scale, I simultaneously wanted to have a sense of whole, that you could step back and look at the whole bridge from ages away, but I also wanted that idea of left to right, so that there is a journey through the piece, but it's all still within its own world. And that idea with the curved bow to me made a lot of sense. The piece sort of starts with one line, one string, and then another string. Cello has 4 strings, bridge has 4 arches. Courtney's piece has 4 clarinets. It's very 4-day.
It is. You've started from a germ, a seed, something small, and produced something quite expansive, but it's tightly framed. Whereas Courtney, it seems you've brought this mass of different reference and experience, and in a way you've condensed it into your 3 minutes, into that skyline. Yes. So in a sense, you've approached the commission from almost opposite poles.
I think so, and that's how it should be. Each human being has different experiences.
I do remember being at the bridge, such a beautiful day, and Courtney's amazing playing, and all the people and the maps she showed us, all the information, but essentially all you can do is what's going to be genuine to you. And so filtering out everything you need to find the one thing that's going to prove real to you as a starting point.
For me, there was so much stories that I wanted to tell. I wanted to tell a story about Elizabeth I and how she deported all the black people, rounded up all the black people in London, and I wanted to tell the story of Guy Fawkes, and there was all these amazing stories that I wanted to put into this 1 3-minute piece.
So
which was just impossible.
How did you pick it then?
Exactly. So that's why I ended up with a piece which was 4 minutes 30, and then having to edit it down. Maybe I enjoy that, being bombarded with all this information, and then at the last minute you really do have to make that decision and take out bars 7 to 24. That's all part of it. In terms of sculpting and designing physical structure, you do have to chip away until you get a perfect face, the perfect form. And this is what we do musically.
We started with architecture, and now I've got this image of Michelangelo's imprisoned form, Courtney Pine chipping away till the piece is finally revealed.
With sandpaper.
On which cross-cultural filtered note we should end. Anna Meredith, Courtney Pine, thank you very much. It's been a great experiment, and they're extraordinary pieces. The experiment continues, because next week we're going to go to Wales, to Port Talbot. Kizzy Crawford, the singer, and Gwilym Simcock, pianist, are going to be giving their variations or versions of the Skyline. Thank you both, though.
Thank you too.
Playing the Skyline was presented by Tim Marlowe and produced by Julian May and Benedict Warren. You can see pictures of the Skyline and hear how Courtney Pine and Anna Meredith trace it in their music by visiting the Radio 4 website. And why not play your own Skyline and email your recording along with a photo to playyourskyline, which is all one word, at bbc.co.uk. Now, in a new series on Radio 4, Irma Kurtz, the doyenne of British agony aunts, talks to other agony aunts working around the world. During the series, we'll hear how emotional problems are shaped by different cultures. Today we go to America for the first programme in our series, World Agony.
This week we'll be talking to agony aunts around the world. Conversations that illustrate how profoundly our emotions